Hey everybody, welcome to the Bass Shed Podcast. My name's Ryan Roberts. How you doing, folks? My name's Ryan. I would like to welcome all the new listeners. Thanks for checking out the podcast. You can also find information at facebook.com/thebasshed, Twitter @BassShed, Instagram @TheBassShed. There's a YouTube channel. There's links to all of it at thebasshed.com, and you can email me at ryan@thebasshed.com as well. You can sign up for the newsletter that goes out probably a couple times a month, right? Letting everybody know what's going on with the content on the website as far as upcoming guests on the podcast. And you can sign up for the newsletter by texting the word SHED, SHED, to 66866. Once again, that is the word SHED, SHED, to 66866. Today on the show is Jonathan Herrera. Jonathan Herrera is a bassist from Southern California who's up in the Bay Area now. And he's doing, what we're all doing. He's spinning a lot of plates. He's got a studio, and we're going to talk about what's happening in his studio and the type of work he does there. That's where this first part of the conversation picks up. Is him just talking about what's going on in the studio. We then talk about the age he got into the bass and early influences and those types of things. He was a contributor and editor to Bass Player magazine for quite a while. We talk about that. The founding fathers of Bass Player magazine have now launched Bass Magazine. We're going to talk a little bit about that. And we also, later in the second part of the conversation, we talk about his podcast with Carrie Norstrand and their approach to what they want to learn or discuss with other musicians and bass players about kind of what's behind the music and just the nature of being a musician and things like that. Things I'm clearly interested in. For those of you that have listened to this podcast before, I'm always interested in kind of the personal journey of the person and how personal journey of the person. It seems like there's a better way to say that. The individual journey of the person, and where music falls into that, and kind of how a person is relating to the music that they relate to, and where the bass falls into that, and kind of how it's all connected on some kind of maybe emotional and psychological level. Jonathan and I do discuss some of those things as well, which I'm always interested to kind of investigate with other people. I don't know, I find it really interesting. So we cover a lot of ground. It was a long conversation. It was a great conversation, and I feel like there's enough. We could have went probably another 2 episodes just hearing about his time at Bass Player magazine and all the stories that he's got from those years. So I hope you enjoy it. And this is Jonathan Herrera. Cool. Man, there's a couple things I want to talk to you about. One, what kind of work are you doing out of your studio? Are you doing just bass tracks? Are you doing full production of tunes?
Full production of tunes.
Okay.
It's just kind of a all-purpose recording environment. So the work we do varies really widely. I'm not super discriminating. I just want to keep people in here and keep the lights on. So, So it's a mixture of my own projects. Obviously all my musical colleagues, when they hear that you have a recording studio, it's like, hey.
They all want cheap shit.
Yeah. So,
They all want the homie rate.
The bro deal factor.
Exactly.
So that stuff, and then, bands, that are local here in the Bay Area or looking to record in the Bay Area. Also been working with a partner on developing some music for advertising. I have a friend in LA who does a lot of work at a music house and kind of presented an opportunity to be in the mix there to compete for these ad jobs. So the last month has been, or month and a half or so, has been a lot of focus on that, which is a cool new endeavor for me, and composing for advertising.
Yeah,
and it calls on like the whole, because the people that are in that world, they're kind of taking ideas and compositions from their genesis all the way through like a mastered thing to present to the music house. So it kind of like, in that way, it's a really interesting kind of diverse use of your skill set, because you have to be able to compose and arrange, and then sound design and mix and master and make it really. And you listen to, just watch TV or whatever, listen to the radio, and like the quality is so high now,
right?
And digital recording has made like access to really high quality recordings like to everybody, so you feel like the pressure to really make it the shit. So it's been a fun new way to apply my skills. But yeah, I do that, and then I end up doing freelance overdubs for people on bass, and
Sure.
all kinds of podcast recording occasionally.
Yeah,
pretty much everything, man.
Okay,
Yeah,
cool. Let's get into your backstory a little bit. You're in San Francisco right now. Where are you originally from?
I'm actually in Oakland right now. Just
you're
to
in
be
Oakland.
Clear.
Ah.
Yeah, those of us in Oakland would take issue with the same way like Brooklyn versus Manhattan or something. But I actually do live in San Francisco. My studio's in Oakland.
Okay.
Yeah. So what was your question? How did I
where are you originally from? Are you originally from the Bay Area?
No, I'm actually from LA.
Okay.
I grew up in Palos Verdes, which is a nice suburb of LA.
It's a very nice suburb of LA.
And we were like the poorest family in the richest part of LA. It felt like.
That's like, if you're in the Palisades, like that's all you've made the cut. Like, you're doing all right, even if you're
right. Yeah.
Even if you're living out of an RV in the Palisades.
Oh, we
still
were
in the Palisades.
Palos Verdes, not the
Palos
Palisades.
Verdes.
Oh, those kind of same difference. Yeah, I mean, my parents, I'm not complaining. Like, I was very privileged, but my father's a university professor. He's a professor at USC, actually.
Oh, cool. What did he teach?
He's a neurobiologist.
Wow, that
sounds
intense.
Yeah, it's actually kind of hard to know what he teaches, just because when you sort of read what he's doing or what his research was, it's like by the second word you're like, okay, I don't know what that is. But yeah, he's been there pretty much since I was born. So that's his world. Yeah, he's still there.
Okay.
He teaches, as far as to teach, so he did a lot of research, although I think that's kind of tapering off. But he teaches like this giant, I think it might be this could be wrong, but at one time I think it was like the largest undergraduate class at USC.
Oh, wow.
It's a biology class for like pre-med students, in this huge lecture hall. And then works with graduate students and stuff. So that's his world.
Okay.
The thing I most remember about it from childhood was most of his research was done using frogs, because apparently there is some overlap between the nervous system of the frog and the human, and obviously frogs are a lot less red tape to cut open a frog than there is a person. So,
sure.
So in neuroscience, I guess frogs are a very typical subject for that. So as a kid, I remember visiting him at his lab, and because it's such a common thing, frogs are so common to use. There is an entire room in this neurosciences building that is just frogs, and you would just go in there and like scoop up a bucket of frogs.
Oh,
and
that's
bring it
kind
back.
of gross.
Yeah, it was super gross. But as a kid, I mean, it was like fascinating.
Yeah.
And my mom is a veterinarian.
Okay.
And still working in LA. So grew up in PV, and then went to high school. This place, Loyola High School, which is about an hour, by car, depends on traffic, from where I grew up. So from a pretty young age, I was already kind of descending into, because PV is like on this hill and it's kind of insular, and but from a young age, but Loyola is near downtown LA, so I was kind of driving through and being exposed to things. And this is I started high school right after the riots, so I remember going through and seeing all the devastation, and that was a real kind of sobering. Like, you had to mature fast.
Sure. I've talked to friends of mine that were at kind of in between L.A. and Long Beach around that time in the mid '90s when all this stuff was going down. And
yeah.
I'm fascinated. Like, I remember watching that on TV as a kid from Phoenix, but it seems like an interesting thing to have been a part of.
Oh, it was crazy. I mean,
Yeah.
I was experiencing it through the lens of, I think I was 12 when it happened.
Sure.
And so I don't think I really appreciated all of the dynamics that led to it. But I remember vividly kind of feeling like we couldn't go into LA proper because it was dangerous, and that just
Sure.
the whole notion, like in this day and age, that something like that would be possible. And I also remember while it was going on, again, where I grew up is up on a hill kind of overlooking this big flat basin of LA that we would, at night, you could see fires all over the place, which was really like crazy apocalyptic scene.
Yeah, kind of surreal.
Yeah, so went to high school there, and then
Any other musicians in the family?
Yeah, my mom plays piano. She grew up, taking piano lessons like a lot of kids, and then got pretty good at classical piano. And by the time I was born and kind of conscious, she wasn't playing often. Every so often, I'd hear her like in the other room, like playing some Brahms or something. And but I think the most meaningful consequence of that was that we had a piano. So
Sure.
There was just, from birth, that was always a fixture of our living room. And then my grandfather actually played saxophone and clarinet, and during the 40s, he was in like dance bands, swing bands that would tour around. At this point, he was in Texas, and he would, these bands that would go to nightclubs and ballrooms and play for people. So that was he was really into jazz of that period, swing and Duke and Basie, Count Basie, and that kind of stuff. And so,
did he ever do any of those kind of bigger touring acts of the time, or was he just local?
It was like a regional band. I mean, at the time, that was sort of the 40s version of starting your own kind of garage band or whatever.
Right.
But yeah, they would play functions and dances, and at this time, I think he was in college when it started, so like college dances and stuff. Yeah, I remember visiting him. He lived in San Francisco, which is kind of how I became familiar with San Francisco.
Okay.
And he would have all these tapes, like he was so enamored of the cassette technology that he could record stuff off vinyl and from the radio and stuff, and that was my first exposure, I think, to jazz of any kind. Yeah.
And then, so growing up with the piano, did you ever have to take piano lessons, or was it just kind of this presence of music in your house?
No, I did take lessons starting very young. I think I was 5, maybe. My first encounter with lessons was the Suzuki method. Are you familiar with that?
Like, I know about it. I've never gone through it.
Yeah, I actually haven't looked into it as an adult, but as I recall, it's like a very kind of technique-oriented, kind of dogmatic, like a lot of sort of technical exercises.
Okay.
Kind of to get your fingering together. It's kind of like methodical technique approach. So that was my earliest encounter with lessons. And then when I was, I don't know, maybe 8 or 9, my mother, like I said, she's a veterinarian, and she's a vet in this suburb, and she, at the time she was kind of like the vet. So she had clients like that were all from this area of LA, and a lot of stuff that I got to benefit from in my childhood. A lot of it was sort of like trades. So someone would have pets that they needed taken care of, but they would have something to offer.
Right.
And so my mom, just being a kind of suburban vet, there was a lot of just community and bartering and stuff. So my first piano lessons were actually, I think, a trade for my mother taking care of this woman's dogs. And this teacher, her name is Edith Knox, and she was at one point, I think, the principal pianist for the Los Angeles Philharmonic.
Wow.
She was like a serious big-time concert pianist.
Yeah.
When I encountered her, she was like in her 80s and very elderly and was barely teaching. And to the degree she was teaching, it was really to mentor like serious pianists, like trying to just pursue it as a career.
Right, just kind of coaching, not...
Yeah, like people who are really trying to, make a go of it in the classical world. And then here I come, like a 9-year-old boy. And it was really, I think, a favor. And because of this relationship she had with my mother that I got to do it. But I vividly, and that was a very impactful time for me because she lived in this great big house up in Palos Verdes. And you walk into her house and in the kind of big living room, there was 2 100-year-old Steinway concert grand pianos, and the wall, and there was another one downstairs, actually. It was just full of pianos. And the wall behind these pianos, this big, tall wall, was covered in, like, just the documents and photos of her amazing life.
Oh, wow.
As a, and...
like
and
living
kind of
in her own museum?
Yeah, essentially, yeah. I mean, it was like proclamations from the city of Los Angeles,
Okay, sure.
and stuff like that, and pictures of her at big concerts, like at Carnegie Hall and all this stuff. And then the most amazing thing was kind of like the centerpiece, like the pride of place on this wall, was this big, kind of ancient-looking black and white photograph, which was her as a child with Franz Liszt, like actually, when they were contemporaries for a minute. Yeah, so that was just impactful. I haven't really I haven't thought about it in a long time, like how exactly, but I think it introduced me to this notion that music was something you could approach seriously and
right, like a viable thing to spend your time on in the world.
Yeah, because this person clearly had done it with such success and had a lot to show for it. And I don't think I put those things together, but when I reflect on it, it's a thing that you can actually pursue and make a living from. How wrong I was.
Yeah. I mean, Edith had it together. She wasn't a bass player in L.A., though. Like
that's the thing.
Yeah, come on, Edith.
You got to pick the right acts.
Right, exactly. So at what point did you start bass?
I think I was about 11, pretty young.
Yeah.
The reason, I mean, that was the point when I was just beginning to, kind of develop my own taste in music and like listen to music on my own terms. I mean, prior to that, I was just whatever my parents had on in the car or whatever.
Which is actually, I'm curious about, like your dad being a scientist, right?
Yeah.
And an academic. What music is kind of coming from the dad's side of the family, and then what side of the music is coming from the mom's side of the family? Yeah.
My dad was, very much a child of the 60s and early 70s, and so, like they always say, your tastes form in that window, like, when you get out of high school, like 18, 20, something like that. And so that was definitely on, and particularly like the folkier side of that time. So not so much like the rock, like the Dead, Airplane stuff, but more like Bob Dylan, Joan Baez, Simon and Garfunkel, like kind of James Taylor. I remember being in rotation. So just like singer-songwriters, I would say.
Yeah.
And I loved that stuff, and I still do.
No, same. That's what my dad was playing too. A lot of James Taylor, a lot of stuff from the '60s, but not the really rockin' stuff. It was all kind of on the mellower side. And then my mom was into '60s music and '50s, but all the soul stuff. So
cool.
Whatever the oldie station was, it's not like she was buying records, but but she just in the car listening to the old soul station, and so.
I wish I had that influence, like the soul side of that was something I had to kind of like discover on my own. But my mom, she wasn't a huge music person, but she was really into like classic show tunes, like Rodgers and Hammerstein. So, I remember she would put on this might have even been on vinyl. Like she put on Oklahoma, or like the original cast recording of The Music Man or something like that.
Yeah.
And so I definitely, I think the kind of like theatrical sort of like narrative, and then as I became a student of music, I discovered just how deep the and professional like the writing and arranging was there. I don't think I knew any of that at the time, but I think that impacted me a lot. So yeah, it was this kind of cocktail of folky singer-songwriters and
but I think you just
show tunes.
Yeah, but you just nailed it. Like both aesthetics. I mean, I guess it's all music, but both avenues of it, either the kind of the Berkeley singer-songwriter scene or show tunes, both have a strong narrative story song thing to it. There's still some connective tissue there that probably had to have at some point maybe played out later in your career of.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think and I think there was something about I mean, it depends on the artist you're talking about, but like on the folk side, if you talk about Paul Simon or James Taylor or Joni Mitchell, this is like very sophisticated. Songwriting. Sure. Like there's an awareness of harmony and melody, and obviously that's true of show tunes. So I think that was pretty influential too, is like kind of being titillated by harmony and clever melodic writing and all that stuff. And then definitely, that there was a story. It wasn't so much like about conveying a certain mood or energy. It was about telling a story,
Yeah, and the other fascinating thing, now that I'm thinking about those two things kind of side by side, which I've never done in my life, they're both musics where it's not, the beat is never the first thing. So it's not like listening to Michael Jackson or something, where it's really about the groove, and whatever he's talking about on top is like secondary,
right,
to this music that's just supposed to be a visceral body response.
Right. Yeah, you're right. That there was a kind of intellectual, less embodied appeal to the show tunes and the folk music, and but then I think like to move into when I got into music on my own, I think I feel lucky to just the timing was such that when I was just beginning to be kind of old enough to like get into music, it was really like right before grunge happened.
Okay.
And so I'm not ashamed, but like for the year prior to that, it was definitely hair metal.
Yeah.
And like, because that was what was on MTV, and MTV felt like the only source of what to listen to and what was cool, and so it was like Poison, Motley Crue, Aerosmith, who I would categorize a little differently than those bands, but
there was an element of that though.
Yeah, totally, and they moved with the times, and but yeah, like rock bands, guitar bands, and like I remember it's so embarrassing after the fact, but like having arguments with my friend who we were just starting to get into this stuff together, like who the best guitar player in the world was. This is probably like 1990. We're having this argument, and the pool of people we were selecting from was so like ignorant and small. It was like, is it CC DeVille or is it Mick Mars, or like it was just like so off base. No slight against those guys, but there should have been other candidates in that discussion. But then like when grunge happened, that really was a turning point for me.
How did you accept? So how old were you around this time?
I was 12 in 91, which I think is the year that's kind of when that all happened.
Okay.
Like that's when Pearl Jam's 10 record came out, and Nevermind came out, and Soundgarden's Bad Motorfinger. All those records I think they were all 91. And yeah, I remember vividly hanging out with my friend John, who played guitar. At this point I had gotten a bass. I got a bass because he played guitar, and I think I thought, okay, if I get a bass, we're going to kind of have 2/3 of a band. Yeah. And also, I think I was just kind of drawn to bass. I don't know. That's another conversation. But
which I'm interested to have, because it's either, and I've had this conversation as a quick tangent more than once. Yeah. Bass players always either typically come from guitar or come from trumpet.
Oh, interesting. Trumpet.
From the majority of the bass players I know and have talked to, my first instrument was trumpet.
Huh.
And it's always one of these two, and I am fascinated by the role of the instrument and how that aligns with the personality of the person.
Oh yeah,
Because,
definitely.
you know,
have a lot of.
Very few bass players that I know have a very outspoken, attention-seeking personality.
True.
Where this very kind of like within the context of a group, guitar and trumpet, that's going to be the on top voice. And bass players as a person typically don't have that. They have the role of the bass personality. I'm fascinated by all that and the psychology.
How do you see? I mean, it's interesting you mentioned trumpet. I can't say that I've observed that, but it sounds like you have, and also you did it.
Yeah.
So how do you see that connection between? What is it about? Starting on trumpet.
I think about the nature of the loud, brassy. In the context of a big band or something, it's going to be on top. If you think of like a lead trumpet player, not trumpet in like the context of a quartet, where hopefully everybody's just doing their job, and it has more of a socialism thing.
Right.
But in the hierarchy of a big band, like lead trumpet is going to be the shredding guitar solo, like hitting the high notes and doing all that.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of the alpha instrument.
Right.
I think that kind of nature doesn't align with the bass player personality.
Yeah. So you're saying like that people start there, realize, oh wait, I'm not sort of aligned with this. I
think people find instruments because they're looking for themselves.
Hmm.
And there's the idea of the instrument picks you, and I think that's kind of a counterpart of it. But we're trying to understand more of ourselves, and through the pursuit of music, I know for me at least, like I've learned a lot about myself through music.
Sure.
And just kind of observing what I'm drawn to, or why am I drawn to this music, and then I'm kind of observing my choices and what I'm responding to, and then kind of mulling that over in my mind, and okay, well I guess just this then. I guess this. And I've learned a lot about myself through music, and I think there's an aspect of that when it comes to. I can't say for everybody, because then there's multi-instrumentalists who don't have personality disorders. They're just great musicians.
Right.
But more often than not, I think there's an element of people trying to understand themselves a little bit more.
Even
really
if it's not conscious.
Yeah, exactly. And identifying with an instrument that will let their voice be heard, so to speak.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I resonate with that. I mean, I think it's hard. It's obviously hard to specifically remember where my head was at when I first got my bass, first bass. But I do recall not really spending much time considering. I mean, it was really going to be between guitar and bass off the bat. I mean, again, I was already playing piano. But so between those two things, I remember just kind of immediately, it might have something to do with the kind of streak in me to be a little bit contrarian, or kind of like opt for the slightly left of center option of the two. I don't know, but yeah, I remember like really being fixated on bass.
Was there a specific recording you heard, or a specific bass line that was like, kind of pushed it over the edge, so to speak? Of like, okay.
Interesting. I think the thing that immediately comes to mind, a few records come to mind. The one that off the bat, I think when I first really noticed bass was the Chili Peppers version of Higher Ground, with that intro where Flea slaps the that line.
Yeah.
In fact, embarrassingly, I think it was a shockingly long time before I realized that wasn't a Red Hot Chili Peppers song. Plus I think they do it in E, which is just not the appropriate key.
It falls easier on guitar and bass.
Makes sense on bass, yeah. So, but yeah, I remember that slap intro kind of being like, whoa, what's that? Like, and then I forget if I had a bass at this point or not, but I remember discovering Primus.
Mm-hmm.
I forget how. I think I was watching him again, MTV. Definitely, pre-internet world. That's where you learned about stuff. And I think I was like watching late at night or something, and they would occasionally. It might have been on what was that show, 120 Minutes. That was like the alt rock MTV show, and they played the video for "Jerry Was a Race Car Driver."
Okay.
Which I don't know if you recall that video, but it's kind of scenes like a Primus show, and Les playing that 6-string Carl Thompson with the rainbow bass, and I just was like, that is the coolest looking musical object I've ever seen. And then his playing, I don't know, it just so interestingly, my initial inspirations
his whole
were
personality was just he always had like a wardrobe thing on. Like, I've never met the guy, so maybe he dresses like this when he goes to Whole Foods. But like the top hat and the glasses, and like he was always theatrically
right.
He was a presence all the time. In
Oh
his
yeah,
playing,
yeah.
like he was always this showman,
totally.
And it was.
I
great.
think it seemed I could perceive that it was like quote unquote cool, like this represented kind of like the artsy sort of fringe of what was going on at the time, right. And older kids, and like it just seemed, now in hindsight, especially being up here, they're from the Bay Area, it strikes me as very sort of Berkeley, of that time of the 80s, this counterculture music scene of the time, like that all makes more sense to me now. And I have met him and met people and actually did a record with the drummer.
Who's the drummer?
So, but the original drummer was what's his name? Tim Alexander? No, am I thinking the guitar player? So I played with this guy Brain, who was not the original drummer, was the second drummer.
Okay.
Is that his name? Yeah, no, Tim Alexander. That's the original drummer. And then Brain did a bunch of records. But so yeah, I'm now in one of the many ways in which life kind of came full circle. For me, but yeah, Les and then the other one. So when I first got a bass, my parents, trying to be supportive, went to the local music store, and I think probably asked someone like, "What's we need like a book or a tape or something to our kid just got a bass. What do we get?" And they bought me I think it was the second Billy Sheehan instructional video.
Okay. Okay. I've never seen either one of those, actually.
Oh, you gotta check them out.
Okay.
They're great. If you want to learn your lobster claw technique or how to play with a drill,
all of that
are really come in handy these days.
I got a drill gig on Sunday.
That was my first. Yeah, that was my first encounter with like bass instruction. Was probably, and Billy is amazing. Like, and I have actually hung out with him and seen him up close, and like he's an amazing musician. But not a style that I think lends itself to kind of being a flexible, supportive, all the traditional aspects of the role. Where that was not what this video is about. It was about like how to tap and play artificial harmonics, and but I didn't have any context, so like that was to me what bass playing was for a while. So I think it was unfortunate because I had to kind of unlearn that, as I began to actually play with other people, and I was like, oh wait, that's not going to help. But yeah, those were my earliest influences, and then I was lucky to I grew up Catholic and in the Catholic Church, although my mother's Jewish. I'm actually Jewish. It's a little confusing there, but
was
church,
she practicing or just kind of culturally?
Culturally,
okay.
Which it's a thing. Like you can't even if you can't, even if she's not involved in the religion, she was very much a Jewish mother.
Sure.
But church was something we did. I mean, we weren't a real. I don't think there was a lot of deep
A lot of deep
piety
theology
going on, but it was just, what one does, I think, as far as my parents were concerned. So every Sunday we went to church. I went to Catholic school all the way through high school. And my church was, I think like a lot of churches in LA, you're when it comes to substantiating like the bands for the weekends, you're drawing on the musical population of LA, which is extremely high level. So, I was listening to, when I was going to church on Sundays, like really great musicians. Like I remember at the time, the guy who's the musical director who was actually played trumpet, he had just gotten off the road for the Graceland tour with Paul Simon.
Oh man, nice.
So yeah, it was like that kind of level. And so I was hearing all this like really competent music. Like the material left something to be desired often, but the musicianship was really good. And then early on, somehow, I forget exactly how this all worked out, I ended up playing at church on Sundays. Playing bass, and so that was hugely important.
And now, so you started around 11. So now, what year? What year is this? Are you 15, 16?
I'm like 13, 14.
Okay, cool.
And I'm getting little one-off opportunities to play at church, and they kind of worked out, and that was like the crucible of how to really be like a working, professional musician, because I was reading charts and lead sheets and trying to figure out how to play in a band. I mean, I had none of these. No one taught me any of this. I just kind of had to, and everyone in the group was adults, and so that was formative, and I kind of did that all through my early teen years, and then that expanded as I got into high school into playing all of the stuff in high school, like whatever thing needed a band, and I was playing both bass and piano depending on the thing.
Okay.
I played piano for a bunch of the musicals and played rehearsal piano, and then played bass. Like I went to a Catholic high school as well, so there'd be assemblies and masses and stuff, and I'd play bass for those, and played in like the pep band, and did all of this without any lessons. I was just kind of learning on the job. But I was lucky to kind of have these opportunities to actually do stuff, with people that were better than me, which is what it's all about.
Now, my personal experiences actually parallels that pretty closely. I think I started whatever year Jagged Little Pill won all the Grammys.
Oh, yeah. Like 94, maybe?
Okay, so I had started playing just before that. Because I remember like having, this bass from a pawn shop that my folks got me.
What was it?
It was a PV Fury. It was their,
yeah, nice.
Just for the PV line, their bottom rung P bass.
Right.
And so then I remember just like sitting in my brother's room when we're watching TV or something, and the Grammys are on, and that was the year that she just cleaned up.
Yeah.
So it was that year. And a few years later, again, similar, like I was playing at church with the older guys. And like that's where I discovered what to do. Like I had nothing. I didn't know, maybe I think I might have been playing a jazz band in high school at this point. No, I wasn't in high school yet. But yeah, like that's where I'm figuring it out. And that was, I think for me, that would play out a lot the rest of my career is not necessarily following a trajectory of peers as much as just go find the older guys. Like I kept that thing happening, and I haven't really thought about all that till right now. I kept that thing always happening, because then when I got to L.A. At 24, a lot of guys that were in my age group there, and I was meeting, and peers and stuff, they were just coming out of college. A lot of them got road gigs. A lot of them went on to do great things. But I kind of found older musicians, a few years older, all the way up to 10, 15 years. I just tried to start hanging around with them. There's something about it like made sense to me if this is where you learn, because of that initial experience of being such a young bass player and learning from guys who are, in their mid-30s or something.
Yeah. Yeah, so, that was wise.
And it's just like I followed that, and a lot of times now I still hear like, "Where'd you go to school?" I'm like, "Right here." Like I'm on a gig. Like this is this is what
Right.
it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I think I don't know. So did you go to school then?
I did. Yeah, I went to USC.
Okay.
But I didn't major in music. I minored in jazz and also law. So essentially, by the time I'm entering college, I didn't feel. I was definitely very much into music. It was my thing, in the same way that another kid would be into baseball or gymnastics. Like I was into music, and but neither of my parents were artistic. Even though my grandfather played music, it was something he did when he was young, and he got a real job. And it was I didn't have this culture in my family of like, this is a thing you can do.
Right. Music's always just a hobby and on the fringe.
It's a hobby. It's a nice thing that rounds out your life, but it's not. It's not a way to make a living. So I was very much just the product of that. And I'm just beginning to kind of become my own person. So I didn't have the courage really to just start college and be like, okay, I'm going to pursue a music major and I'm going to become a professional musician. Like that just didn't seem like a thing that you did.
Right.
So, for lack of much of other ideas, I majored in political science and law and was going to essentially go to law school.
Okay.
Was the plan. I think my parents both being kind of professionals with a bunch of postgraduate education, like that, there was this real emphasis on that as a kid. And it was kind of like, undergrad is just the beginning of this, 8 years of training you're going to get to go out and to become this, professional person. And
right.
that was just the track I thought I had to be on.
Do you have siblings? Were you an only child?
I have a sister,
okay.
younger, year and a half younger. Yeah.
Okay. Did she go on into the quote unquote, professional white collar life?
Very much so. Yeah.
Okay.
She's in education, and she's a dean of a high school here, a big private high school here, actually.
Very
now.
Cool.
Yeah, our paths have always kind of diverged in that I was definitely the kind of the artsy, the weird one.
Yeah.
But
which is actually kind of interesting birth order wise.
Ah, interesting. You think it's usually the other way around?
I typically think like the firstborn is the more type A. I'm the middle of three, and my brother has a bit more of the type A than I do, and my sister as well. I'm kind of the loose cannon in the middle.
yeah, I'm very much that. I mean, I was probably it's interesting to just speculate. I mean, I was very impacted when I was 14. My parents were divorced, and I think that that's obviously a hard age for that to happen.
Yeah.
And I think. I wonder, had that not happened, of course, a million things in my life would be different. But I think that at that age, when I was already, like I said, I was into grunge and starting to kind of then looking at those artists and okay, who influenced them? Okay, that was like punk rock and new wave. So I was kind of getting into this this music that kind of had a rebellious undertone.
That's where I was going. So like the nature of grunge and punk and all that, in that period of music within the 90s, there was all this angst.
Exactly.
All this
classic.
Angst. Yeah. Classic just
Gen X angst.
Yeah, exactly. But now you're going through, you're living out your parents splitting. So that's all kinds of emotional content in addition to just being 14 and trying to figure out who you're at in the world.
Right, that's hard enough.
Yeah. Like just being 14, like my folks were still together, and just being 14, then was hard enough. I couldn't imagine dealing with such a life-altering thing. I've never lived through my parents, obviously getting a divorce, but I've gone through one, and like it's traumatic. It's really traumatic.
Mm-hmm.
And so being a child and not really, I don't know, fully understanding the nature of a divorce. It's just mom and dad aren't mom and dad anymore. Like, what the hell?
Yeah, you don't. I mean, you can't possibly have an informed perspective on it because you're a kid and you don't understand what it is to even be in a relationship, much less to end one. And it's all seen through the lens, I think, of like movies and TV and books that, just this kind of cultural vocabulary around divorce. It's
Right.
not the real thing, you know what I mean? And so it was extremely difficult and disruptive. And I think, and my parents were already like super busy people, and I didn't have they both worked a lot, and so I spent a lot of time growing up alone. And I think, so I was already kind of acclimated to that. And I think post-divorce and split, and, you know, my mom and my sister and I moved out of the house I grew up in and got another place. Like, I think it just caused me to kind of really sort of crystallize this idea that I was on my own and become more insular and kind of pursue my own interests. And yeah, definitely the soundtrack of what I was feeling was the angst that like seemed to be so present in the culture at the time.
Sure.
So I think that, I found a lot of release in that, you know, and I think that's probably the first encounter I had with music being something that could offer that to you, some kind of emotional, an opportunity to contend with your emotional landscape.
Sure. Did it make you? Did any of that music from that time help you? Not just gave you this feeling of like, I'm not alone because there's other people in the world feeling like this. But did it help? Any of that music help describe what you were feeling? So maybe you'd listen to a song and you're like, yes, I didn't know how to put it into lyrics, but that would be how I would write about this.
Yeah.
Was there, like, did you learn about what you were going through?
Interesting.
Through the music?
Think I can't point to an explicit connection. I think it was more the catharsis that seemed to be the result of really putting it all out there. Like, you know, really the passion and intensity of like Kurt Cobain or someone like that gave me license to feel that way, to sort of seek that same, what seemed like almost like like that there was some necessity for people like Kurt or someone in working through how they were feeling and doing it loud and doing it on a stage and doing it without any self-consciousness. Yeah. That as an example to me, and it was so different from my like I said, my earliest encounters in music were all about image and were highly self-conscious. And that music was a space for people who maybe didn't have perfect lives, and for people for whom things hadn't always worked out. Music was a place to find community and to just kind of expunge all of that energy in a way, in a that I think stuck with me, as you know, just that release. You know, I think I felt a lot of things I didn't understand and didn't really have an opportunity to put them anywhere. And music became a way to do that. And I think it was
that period of music also, and going through something that at a young age, I know that, I mean, and it's kind of documented throughout history with famous musicians responding to other famous musicians. They look up to somebody, their music is valuable, so then they start duplicating the bad habits of the musician's life.
Yeah.
Were you susceptible to that?
I was, I mean, no. I think I was still very much living in a place of tension between the somewhat staid, comfortable sort of suburban lifestyle and my parents, again, both being people who, other than their relationship, like truly had their shit together.
Right.
With this desire to rebel, to express myself, to be independent. And so while I did definitely act out to a degree, it was always sort of bounded by this basic kind of like, there was sort of a limit, like an internally imposed limit on how far I would go. Right, I mean, that said, there were things that happened, like they could have gone another way, and I would, you know, not be in good shape. But but by and large, no, I kind of kept it together. I mean, I think my rebellion was pretty like standard issue,
Sure.
teenage. And again, I had a lot of time alone, so I kind of had to self-regulate. But I smoked pot when I was young, and I started smoking cigarette. I mean, all that stuff, but nothing too gnarly. I think in a way I was almost scared of that. There was something at a time for me that was very unstable and uncertain to be learning about the actual, adult instability that comes with like heroin addiction,
Right.
or melting down in public, like these things I was learning about like Courtney Love and Kurt Cobain and all Eddie Vedder and like all these people, like all of that kind of intimidated me, and
Sure.
it was almost like more for me like a cautionary tale than anything,
Right.
and I felt empathy for them. I think at the time, as someone that was also going through something. So no, I managed to kind of escape that period without getting in too much trouble, I would say.
Right.
Yeah.
So you get out of school.
So I go to school. Yeah.
You graduated with the law degree and
Yeah, well, political science, and then
Political science.
and then there was a lot of jazz study going on, and that was my first encounter with like great teachers. On my instrument, there was a guy named Tim Emmons who's still in L.A., great bass
Sure.
player. Tim.
I know of Tim. We've always kind of orbited each other.
He's fantastic. I think he's got the Jeff Goldblum gig, or has. For a long
I
time.
know he had it.
Okay.
I think it's Alex Frank now.
Oh, okay.
Because I just did one of these with Jeff's guitar player.
Oh, okay. Well, you would know. But yeah, Tim was like my first real bass teacher, and he was kind of adjunct at USC, and he was the guy that. Actually, that's not true. I had this one guy when I was like 15, maybe a little younger, 13, 14, who I met. So I used to go to Guitar Center all the time and just loiter.
No, I did that at multiple guitar stores in Phoenix. Like that was like the equivalent of the bar when you're
totally
when you're like 14 or 15 and you're playing music. You just go hang out, talk to the guys behind the counter,
annoy the shit out of
it just always
sales.
pick a different guitar that's way too expensive to play.
Yeah, I would get in these.
You understand the instrument just because it's expensive. Like, oh man, I got to play. Like,
exactly.
Yeah.
I had no idea what I was talking about, and
Right.
I remember being conscious of okay, I'm sort of on borrowed time here. I need to. This is still like a store. It's not like my personal, sort of library of cool instruments. So,
Right.
so I used to get. I would take the bus. I mean, it's so ironic now because the last place I want to be on earth is a Guitar Center. But at the time, I would
Or a bus.
Or a bus.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I had no car, and I really wanted to be in one. So, in LA, you got to, the idea of someone from LA that I took a bus to get anywhere in LA must mean I really wanted to be there.
Sure.
And so I take the bus for like an hour to get to this Guitar Center, and then I would always get involved in these negotiations as a way to justify my presence with absolutely no ability of following through on it. But it get to the point where they're going back and talking to the manager, and you're
haggling? You're price
I'm like
haggling?
haggling. I had like $40 to my name.
And what are you trying to get? Like an Ampeg 810 or something? Like
no, it'd always be basses. It'd be like I remember there was like a Lakeland, it was like the first Lakeland ever.
Sure.
I remember they had, and it was like up in this like above everything, and had this like quilted maple top, and I would pretend. I don't know what I would love to like see myself then, just how ridiculous I was. But I felt like, okay, if I don't do this, they're going to kick me out. So I have to kind of pretend I have, an interest in these things. But yeah, I remember I met some guy there on one of my days, just hanging out, and I watched him play bass.
Did you become a regular where they just knew you? Like, this
kinda, yeah. I kind of had
just
to
let him go screw around over there. He's fine.
I had to kind of time it. I couldn't like press that button too much. And I would go to there was one in Torrance, which was kind of near to where I was. And then occasionally, as we got a little bit older, like 15, my parents, I mean, this probably would never happen nowadays, but they let me, a couple times I took the bus from PV to Hollywood to the Sunset Guitar Center, which was like a 2-hour bus ride.
Yeah.
And there, like, it's so busy, like you can stay anonymous there. But I would kind of oscillate, so that they didn't learn my face too well.
Okay.
But yeah, I met some guy there, and I remember watching him play, and he was like killing, man. He played all this slap, and I was just, I'd never really seen that up close, and this guy, my parents actually, again, another thing that probably wouldn't happen these days, I somehow I got his number, he got my number, and he came over to my house a couple times, and my parents just left me alone in the garage with him, and he was the first guy that showed me the real book.
Okay.
He showed me, like, he taught me how to play all blues. Like, just my first little exposure to that world was this guy. And he came like 2 or 3 times, and then we had another one scheduled, and he just didn't show up, and I never heard from him again. He just dropped into my life. I remember he had this Stingray that was like the coolest bass.
That's the music lesson right there.
Right.
This is musicians in society. They do enough, but then they just...
when it comes down to it, eventually they'll flake.
Yeah, exactly. That's the real music exposure.
Yeah, that was the wrong lesson. But yeah, and so that was like my only bass lesson until I got to college, and then late in my career at college, I got to benefit from, SC has an amazing program at the time, and there was a bunch of people. Joe Diorio was there, and Tim, and
is that when Shelley Berg was there?
Shelley Berg was there.
Yeah.
He was the head of the jazz department, and
right.
Guitar player Steve Trovato, and the Monk Institute came in my last year there.
Okay.
So there's a bunch of kind of people visiting and lecturing, and I would try to go to all that stuff. And so by the time I got out of college, I was super pumped about bass and playing music, and but still I was really at a crossroads because I could no longer forestall this question about what to do. And I had this degree, and I actually had done all the things that you need to do to get into law school, which is this really labor-intensive process of the LSAT and getting, references, all this crap you have to do. And it was getting to the point where I couldn't stall any longer. And so I had my first real identity crisis, and I basically convinced my parents to let me put off law school for a year, and instead I would go to what at the time was LAMA, which is now LACM, the Los Angeles Conservatory College of Music. Sorry, I should know that. But the time was this Los Angeles Music Academy, and
that's how I still think about it. Because when I was like, back in the day, thumbing through Bass Player magazine, there'd be ads with Gary Willis, right. for Llama. And so in my head, and I have a bunch of friends that teach over there now, but I still call it Llama.
Yeah.
And then they'll correct me. I'm like, oh, well, okay, yeah, but it's just Llama. Just go.
It had a ring to it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember
it
was
easier
like
to see. I didn't have to think about it, and it didn't sound like Laka. No, what's the?
It was Lockham.
Because there's an art museum, the one on Wilshire and Fairfax.
LACMA.
You're right.
Has an M.
Right. I always
LACMA.
get it confused with that one. And
right.
there was no
Which
controversy there. I could just Llama, and I knew
totally.
it was the music.
Exactly. Yeah, I was like, I need something to do. I couldn't just not go and then not do anything. I knew my parents wouldn't bite on that, but
sure.
So I'm like, okay, education. What can I do? And so I was looking into what's something I could do, and it was kind of came down to, because I knew I wanted to keep learning. I was just kind of getting into really studying and doing transcriptions and focusing on harmony and all this shit. And
so after your sorry to interrupt, but after your jazz thing, your jazz studies at USC. Was that all on electric bass?
Yes, it was all electric.
And how was that perceived there? I'm sure there's guys that are, obviously, especially with the addition of the Monk Institute there and just kind of the culture, as I understand it, of USC now.
Right.
There's a purist.
Yeah.
Not completely purist, but it's not a preservation program by any means.
Sure.
But there's an honoring of the tradition there, and that does not involve the electric bass.
Totally. I think that I was lucky in that it was the real the studio guitar department there was starting to come into its own, and that was a really sort of almost like a vocational approach, which was kind of innovative rather than this kind of conservatory pedagogical approach. This was kind of almost taking the model of like an MI or Llama or whatever, and into the more formal setting of a university, and so there was a little bit higher tolerance for, okay, what do you want to be in music, by trade, and
Sure.
this is kind of the skill set you need to actually get out there and do it. And I didn't aspire. I mean, part of me definitely was enamored of all the great acoustic players at school and in general, and in jazz. Of course, I was studying jazz, so I was like being exposed to all of them and
Sure.
and studied them. But I don't think I ever really was like, okay, that's what I want to do.
Sure.
Is be a straight ahead, double bass player. So I think there was some flexibility at that moment, as far as, okay, you want to play electric bass, like that's probably going to be more viable, to be honest. Than,
yeah.
And there was a little more of like a, this is going to train you to be a session guitar player, pop session guitar player, and so I didn't encounter too much. I think had bass been my major, I wouldn't have been an option. I would have had to play bass, acoustic bass.
Okay.
So, but the fact that it was like not gave me some flexibility there.
Right.
And then when I got to Llama, it was very much an electric, situation.
Yeah, they're more empathetic to the electric.
Yeah.
And actually, I don't even know really too much what the upright thing is.
I don't believe there really is one.
Last I heard, no, I was just doing a gig with a drummer over there, and he was telling me about it. To go talk to Jerry about doing the upright thing. I'm like, man, I feel like if there was a need for it, they'd already have it on lock. Like,
right.
I'll go talk to Jerry, sure, but I'm just throwing my name in a hat that's, will never be. I don't know what
the current situation is. Although I could see something like, I think in the East might have even happened when I was there, they doing like a master class or like a quarterly,
right,
seminar that's like, so this is the acoustic bass, and so you want to get into this, like, like that's something that might happen, but yeah, so Llama, that was my first, like, okay, this is my real exposure to basically in terms of the faculty. Like these are guys doing and women doing the thing that I'm learning I want to do, like these are working people. This is like another gig for them. And I'm really seeing and just obsessed with observing, like, how do they operate in the world, and like, how are they talking? And I was just so into it, and it just turned me on. And this whole time, I'm telling my parents I'm not going to go to I'm going to go to law school. I'm just going to do this thing for a year. And within like a week, I was like, that's never going to happen.
But they didn't know that. At what point
they didn't know that? Well,
did they get hip to the fact that, like, okay, the law thing is just not going to happen?
Well, what's crazy is I went through. So when I originally decided to put off law school for a year, I didn't send my applications. I was like, okay, I'll stall this until the next application season or whatever, the following summer. I forget when that happens, but I had taken the LSAT, which I put a ton of work into preparing for, and gotten all the other stuff out of the way. And even though, so my point is that, like, a lot of effort went into even getting to a position where I could apply. So when I'm in music school now at Llama, I feel like some weird need to finish the process, even though I knew I wasn't going to go. I think when you really think you're going to go to law school, like probably any graduate school, you become a little bit obsessed about which one and where can I get in. And law school is particularly like pegged to your grades and your LSAT. Like it's a very like, it appeals to that part of you that wants to sort of rank yourself,
Yeah.
be validated in that way. So I wasn't quite ready to let that go. Like I wanted my ranking, even though if it was just for me. So I ended up applying to law school while I was at Llama with zero intention of going, purely because I wanted to know. But I didn't I hadn't told my parents I'm going through Llama. I'm doing that whole thing. I passed into it was a year-long program, but I passed into the second half of it. So I only was there for 6 months. And it wasn't until I got letters of acceptance back from law schools that I told my mom I wasn't going to go. Like in the same conversation, like I knew how happy she would be that I got into this school or that school. And literally, I feel really guilty about this. Like I came home, actually I was living at home at the time, and got this thing in the mail, and it was acceptance letters, and I had some of them kind of stacked up, and I'm like, okay, I cannot stall this conversation any longer. So the same chat where I was like, Mom, I got into Berkeley or whatever the school was, she was all excited. I'll go, and then my coda was, but I'm not going. So she had this whole roller coaster.
I have to know how your Jewish mother took the fact that you're not going to be a lawyer.
She was.
I bet you wanted to keep going to the music school. How did
she was
that go over?
intensely skeptical.
Sure.
But she's yes, she does. There are a number of stereotypes that I could say might apply to her, but there are a number that don't. Okay. And she was, instead of being unsupportive, she was just highly skeptical that this was a reasonable desire, not just some whim that I was going to regret for the rest of my life.
Yeah, and I think that's. Do you have children? I don't have any children.
I do not.
I think if I was, as a parent, and this is being a musician, if 13 or 14-year-old child told me this, knowing what I know about the music industry, I'd be probably more skeptical than if I didn't know anything about it at all. But because it's not, I don't feel like most, when you're that age, you're 13 or 14, you're out of college at this point, so you're what?
Yeah. 21.
Okay. So you're entering, this is like you're on the precipice of really entering adulthood.
Mm-hmm.
And you have you just got accepted to law school or music school. Understanding what I at least know of the world now.
Right.
I would obviously try to hopefully steer a child in the way of like, well, trust me, you don't know how hard this gets. Like, whatever you think life is right now at 21, you have no idea. You have no idea. Really, just don't worry about it. That'll always be there. What you don't know about is still in front of you.
Sure.
So I can understand the skepticism of, choosing that side of the fork in the road. But it's cool that there was still a lot of support there.
There was support. It was like, okay, well, show me how this is going to work then. Like, what are you talking about? I was like, well, I don't know, but I don't want to go to law school. So that was a major turning point in my life, obviously, because it meant not pursuing this potentially lucrative life of comfort and kind of jumping headfirst into this cesspool that we call the music industry.
I agree. Lawyers make more than probably the average musician.
I think that's true.
But the payoff's different. Like the quality of life is like cool. They can live in Malibu or whatever.
Oh yeah,
But then you have to see and interact with the judicial system and what a dog and pony show. The deeper you get into anything, there's always a realization of like, really, this is it.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
That's happened even within music for me. Like, you get into it, and it's like, really? This is what it is?
Sure.
So I can't imagine getting into the judicial system and then realizing that and seeing so many aspects of humanity that I might not want to really interact with.
Yeah. And just also, I think and I was sort of affirmed in that choice as friends of mine, let's say from college, who did go that route, now were, starting to get their first jobs and occasionally talking to them, and they were pretty much to a person miserable.
Really, really quick into the game. They were already.
Yeah, because it was, especially at that point, your entry level law career, it depends, what vector of law you're in, but generally they were working 70, 80 hours a week, and they were, weekends, and so the quality of life aspect didn't seem to be there. And I mean, you were talking about like what it would be like to have your own child who is at that precipice. Yeah. And the thing I think my mom might have sensed, although didn't explicitly say, and this is something I would tell if I did have a child and they wanted to do this, I would ask them, do you need to do this? Like, do you feel
that's the thing, yeah.
like if you don't do this, it is like a sort of like a kind of a death of who you are. And if that's
what age did you realize that there wasn't an option? Because I don't know if I ever really realized. I thought that everybody was wired the way I was wired.
Right.
But it was just something else. So maybe this guy's really into, getting a communications degree. That's just like, that's his, he obsesses over that the way I'm obsessing over this. I thought everybody had the same obsessive quality.
Right.
And I didn't figure out that wasn't the case until way later.
I think I didn't think that, only because I remember even in college and then just after college, because we're all, me and my friends, we're all sort of trying to figure it out and what are we going to do with our lives. And I remember often, this resonates with you, being told like, oh, you're lucky that you have this thing that you love. I don't think they recognized it as like a potential job, but they were like, just the fact that I had clarity about.
Right. There's a strong, passionate.
There's a passion, and I have a drive to pursue something, at all. But I don't know that I would have identified that it as a sort of like existential obligation until, my early 20s. I mean, I think that once I made that choice to not go to law school, and that path of my life was now closed to me. I think just it abstractly sort of started to seem true that this was something I had to do. My identity started to quickly pivot to one in which, okay, I've made that choice. I've staked my, the esteem in my parents' eyes, and which is such an outsized influence at that moment in your life, like on this decision. And then as, that was what, I'm 40 now. That was 19 years ago. Like that fact of needing to do it, because to not do it would be to not be me. And to not be me would feel like a kind of a torture. That has been the thing that I can't imagine pursuing this if that wasn't the case. And I think it's a kind of filtering process. Like the people that don't have that same intensity, or the dilettantes, like they might look at some of the trappings of the life or some aspect of it and be like, okay, I want that. But when in those dark moments, when you're either alone, like shedding, or you're, not, the phone's not ringing, whatever, like if you don't feel like, okay, there's not an option to quit, right, you're going to quit. Because why wouldn't you? Like it doesn't make sense.
I've kicked myself. I've kicked myself for like when around that age, when I'm 20, 21, I tried college a few times, didn't work out. But there was never a plan B. And I kind of set it up like that. Like I knew that this thing was happening in my life. I don't know how. I don't know how any of it works. There's people doing it, so apparently there's a way to make this work somehow. Right.
But I got to.
Yeah, I have to. And there was never a plan B until like right around the time I was about to turn 30. I'm like, man, why didn't I really, being a programmer wouldn't have been so bad.
Oh yeah. Yeah, when the rent starts to go up and cost of living, right? And you want to do stuff and like take your girlfriend out, occasionally, or whatever it is, get a new car.
Yeah, exactly. Just go get a hamburger.
Have a life. Yeah, I hear you.
But I think in retrospect, yeah, I mean it's a hard at times. There's dips and valleys, and but I'm still glad that there was never a plan B.
Right.
Because then my plan B always had to be, well, and maybe this is accurate, and maybe every musician feels like this. I think they probably, we've probably all thought this at some point, but the first thing is, the first Friday or Saturday night, you don't have a gig in 6 weeks. It's like, well, damn, now I suck.
Oh, yeah.
And everything you've ever done in your life or career or whatever, like, I suck. Mm-hmm. So plan B was always just like, well, better go back to practicing. Not that I ever really left it, but like I just got to dig it. I'm not digging in hard enough. They're all practicing 40 hours a day, apparently, and I got to just practice more, and I got to obsess more. And,
totally.
I tried to use all that as fuel to continue to dig in. And
Yeah, the role of sort of like negative motivation in creativity is interesting because it's hard to endorse it, like feeling shitty about yourself. But at the same time, it seems, at least for me, like a prerequisite to have the drive to do something that isn't really pleasant, like practice, 3 hours a day at this point in my life or something, like you kind of need that. Well, you need all the things, you need the whole gamut. I think
a lot
that
of times,
issue,
like practicing is more fun than gigs. Like I love obviously the nature of playing music with people as a bass player. Like I it's not like I can ever go do a solo bass gig. There's guys out there that do it. That's cool.
I had an unintentional solo bass gig once.
Who didn't show up?
Man, I had this the whole band. So they eventually did, but they were like 45 minutes late, and the manager, I was the only one there, and he could tell I was in the band because I had set up at this club in San Francisco, and it was kind of like a lounge, so it wasn't like like a big audience was waiting for the band. But he came up, he's like, "Where's your band, man? This is like 10 minutes to go." I'm like, "I don't know. I called them, and they're not picking up. I don't know." He's like, "Well, we need music at 8. So I don't know what you're going to do about that, but that was the agreement." And I'm like, okay. So I got up and did like a half hour of solo bass.
Did you have any kind of like anything to make that a little bit more palatable? Like, do you have a chorus pedal? Do you have any kind of looper or effects
I might have had like a delay or something just to kind of give it some vibe. Yeah. And I think I just played tunes. I just kind of like played chords through standards and kind of noodled, kind of the shit I might do at home alone, when I'm not really focused on anything in particular. We all know as bass players, there's probably a bunch of stuff we tend to do when we're alone that we're never doing, on gigs or rarely doing. And so I had definitely put in a lot of time into that. Just never thought I would actually have to do it. But I mean, it wasn't as I recall, it wasn't a complete fail. But yeah.
So what happened? What happened to the band guys? Did they miss the whole first set? What was
they
the
just
excuse?
all like I don't know. They were just lazy. They missed the first set. Like I think there was it was 2 cars. Like 2 of them were carpooling and they got stuck in. I don't know. It was typical shit. Clearly not a high priority gig for them.
Clearly.
Yeah, but I was pissed.
So where are we at? There was something that derailed us from.
Well, no, it's all good. I went to school. Decided to become a bass player, and that was really when kind of as Llama was wrapping up, and I was kind of coming to a conclusion about this decision to be a musician. It was around that time that I started to really question where I wanted to do that. Having grown up in LA, I was pretty burnt out on it.
On the city? Because at that age, there wasn't a lot of activity on the scene yet.
No. There was very minimal activity on the scene. But no, it was more the city, the lifestyle, the traffic, the density, the heat, all these things.
That's an age, though, man. Like, that's an age where, wherever you grew up, you just want out.
Yeah, exactly.
Because you're figuring out your own life, and you're making your own personal decisions now, and part of that is, where do I want to live? I'm figuring out who I want to be in the world. Well, now part of that is geography.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think I needed to, because I was sort of making a break with this vision of myself at the time, I think there was some subconscious desire to kind of make a break with who I had been, and that meant leaving. Not to say I tried for a bit in LA. Went on a couple auditions. I remember being hooked up with this guy Barry Squire. Is he still?
He's still doing the do.
Still doing the So got a couple cool opportunities through him. Nothing ever came to fruition, including. This is a good story. I got a call to do. I'm like 21 at the time and just starting, and I got a call to audition for this new band that the actor Jared Leto is putting together called 30 Seconds to Mars. And I was like, okay. I knew who he was from
that
my so-called
band was
life.
a Barry Squire audition?
Yeah.
Hilarious.
Oh, man. It gets better. So I don't know how much I should dish. Well,
whatever won't get you personally in trouble.
Yeah. I mean, let's just say it. So
Unless
it was.
you're okay with that.
Yeah, I don't know who. I can't even tell. This is the problem with not being in LA. Like your radar for what gets you in. I don't know.
Right.
I'm up here. It was just a glimpse into how the sausage got made. You know,
Yes.
as far as putting these things together. That you're seeing as a consumer of music, you're seeing this finished product, this polished thing, and this narrative around how it all came together. And then I was exposed to the other side of that.
Right.
And I remember, just feeling very like, I think that might have been influential a bit on my leaving. It was sort of realizing like, okay, how much of that process was really about image and look and these aspects of music that at the time I was really geeking hard on bebop and the authenticity of that, what I thought was the authenticity of that. And this kind of seemed to be a different thing. And I was a little more kind of principled in ways that were not entirely like they might have been a little self-defeating. And I just didn't align with that aspect of it. So I do remember this one fact. Jared Leto could not play guitar. And I remember. Is
that a literal or a figurative?
Literal. At
Okay.
least at the time. I assume he's improved. But I remember having to learn a bunch of like songs for the audition, and it was like a couple of their like demos, and then some random covers. Like I remember having to learn Tom Sawyer for the first time in my life. Which was like not insignificant,
Sure.
And then discovering when I got there that he didn't know those songs and that he mostly tuned his guitar open E and barred everything.
Oh, really?
Yeah, like it was at that point. I'm sure it's gotten better, but that was sort of like, oh, okay. But yet you're getting all this push and attention, and you're going to clearly make a major label record, and you're going to go on tour. Like all this stuff was available to you.
He's already like I don't know that much about him. I saw the documentary they did. I don't know a few years ago. But at this point, when you're auditioning, he was already an actor. He's already got some.
Oh yeah, he was famous.
Okay.
He was dating Cameron Diaz at the time. I remember it was a big deal,
Okay.
and she actually came by at the end of the audition, and he had been in My So-Called Life. Which was a huge show on MTV at the time with Claire Danes. It's also where Claire Danes got started. And he was, he might have done Requiem for a Dream might have come out also. So he was kind of like on the up, and he was, like, and also kind of like had this edge, that was kind of like the bad boy rep.
Right.
So, and definitely like a tabloid, fixture. So I was kind of bringing all that baggage going into it. And I think, it was just, it was realizing like a lot of this music business thing is artifice. And that's fine. That's what it is. And a lot of it is entertainment and it's showbiz. And I just think at the time I was very kind of typically idealistic, like, and thought that wasn't something I'd be interested in participating in. Now, if I had that opportunity, I'd be like, oh, yeah, I'm going to give that a go.
I remember talking to somebody else about that, about how, like, I was never, when I first got to LA, I wasn't interested in going and doing the Barry Squire auditions, and I wasn't.
Mm-hmm.
I was still practicing upright all the time, and I was interested in trying to go to a school in New York.
Right,
and,
being an artiste.
Yeah, and that's what I was interested in. So now, yes, I would completely go do it.
Yeah.
Because one, like I know I've said before, every gig ends. But I thought that would define me for some reason.
Sure.
Like if I went out on the road with some pop act, then I don't get this.
$60 jazz gig.
right. Or in the back of my mind, at some point I'm going to be on the cover of Downbeat, and now that will never happen because I went out with Shakira.
Right.
or
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah,
So
that's
I
a kind
never-
of youthful, misguided feeling, I think.
It is. In retrospect, take anything. It's all
Take
just
anything.
work, and it'll all end.
And it's all in part of maybe your resistance to it is not yours, but one's resistance to it is a subconscious, like not wanting to rise to the challenge, because it turns out it's actually hard. It's hard to do a pop gig well. It's hard to develop a stage presence.
Yeah, it was like I couldn't deal with the failure. If I didn't get the gig,
yeah,
then that would completely destroy my self-esteem.
totally.
And I really just didn't have it in me to show up with the idea of like, well, they just went with somebody else, doesn't mean I can't play.
Yeah,
it would completely be like, where's the first pawn shop, because I'm done with this.
Yeah, I mean, conveniently, even like now in the retelling of the story, like there is a part of it where I realize like I frame it in such a way that it was sort of my idealism or like artistic integrity, which is why I didn't do it, which is probably a way of coping. I mean, I'm not really attached to it at the time, but I remember it was not long after that band got huge. Sure. And I remember thinking like, oh, that would have been cool, but
yeah.
But then
because
I think
you take a look at what happened with them and then your reality, and you're just like, huh.
Exactly.
Well, I'm still living in this apartment on Hollywood and Vine, and
absolutely, man,
in Italy right now.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I think that I probably over the years have a narrative around that, which is, well, it was about my. I chose the path of integrity rather than to help me rationalize not having gotten that gig, which is something we all have to do, is to cope.
Right. We have to explain it away and project
in ways that allow us to
deflect
wake up in the
everything.
morning.
Yeah, right, exactly.
So it wasn't long after that I left LA and I moved to the Bay Area. I moved to San Francisco, and I've been here ever since. And that
now, how long into? Oh, go ahead. But I'm curious
go
about
ahead.
something.
You go.
At what point after your move to the Bay Area did you start working with the former construct of Bass Player magazine?
Bass Player. Yeah. So that was about a year or so. I moved up here. I was familiar with San Francisco because of my dad grew up here. My that whole side of the family is in the Bay Area, so I've been coming here since I was born, and loved it. I love San Francisco. Loved, I would say, and I just like showed up in town like anyone who does, and with my bass in hand, and was like, all right, let the gigs begin, and
now what was your break into the scene? Were you checking out classifieds? Anybody needing a bass player? Just
I was
to
looking
pick
at this.
I
was
hanging
like
fruit, or were you going out to the jam sessions and meeting musicians in person?
Kind of all of the above. It was a different world then. It was
Yeah.
In early days of the internet and early days of just kind of pursuing things online. So there was Craigslist. There was trying to figure out what the jams were.
Mm-hmm. What year is this?
2001 I moved here.
Okay.
So just trying to do all that thing, man, like just show up raw in a town and get connected. And I think my first real like opportunities actually came through Craigslist. There was like this band that was kind of like this big rambling kind of West African hip hop thing that was looking for someone. I auditioned for that, got that was, and they were gigging pretty regularly, so that was just a chance to get into rooms and get to know like where to play. And just kind of but a lot of just trying to do anything I could, and I did realize, and this is something I think I took with me from my exposure to like at Llama to like real people doing this was, say yes to everything, hustle as much as you can, meet as many people as you can. It's all about the interpersonal thing, like all of those aspects. I was trying to practice in my life. I think I to this day, like I'm not naturally an extrovert, and I think I struggled then, and I still struggle to kind of authentically be the like vibrant, energetic, hang that I thought like that equals gigs. People want to hang out with you, and not to say I'm a bad hang. It's just like I'm not the the social butterfly.
Right.
By nature.
No, I'm not either. And there's some people I know in town that are. They're just
kill it at that. Yeah.
And it'll be like a rather large group, 6 or 8 of us all hanging out, and this dude's just the life of the party, and he's making it all happen. Yeah. And I'm completely uninterested in the idea of even being anywhere near that guy. Like he's my friend, but and I'll probably be in the pack of 6 or 8 listening. But for me personally to do that, to light up the group like that, I'm not interested. I'll go sit and talk with somebody one-on-one, like this. I love doing this. But I'm not a huge, the bunch of people and the crowds and always being on. I feel like that's part of the performance of being a musician.
Right.
If that makes sense, is the performance, being able to play the bass and just do the craft. That's the part I love.
Exactly.
Everything else is the performance at times.
Yeah, it's
showing up and just hey man, how you doing?
Yeah.
Looking forward to it. Doing the whole musician script.
Yep. That's labor intensive for me.
Yeah.
And I think for some people it's not. I think some people that flows naturally and it benefits
I'm jealous of those people.
Me too.
I really wish I had it like they had it. It's not in there. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I console myself with the fact and that yes, that's true. That's an asset. I do think it's a meaningful asset to be that way naturally. It can lead to real tangible things. But also, by virtue, we can get into bass player and all that. I've gotten to get to know and talk to and learn from so many iconic bass players and also just get to know the community of just working, journeyman bass players and. It's not a universal skill. It's not like it equals success. You know what I mean? No. There's plenty of legendary players I've met who have this same introverted tendency. So
sure.
I kind of whenever I'm feeling bad about it, I think about those people and console myself.
Nice.
But yeah, so I was in the Bay Area just trying to do the thing, and I was about a year in. I got a job as a kind of like a paralegal type thing because it was all it was qualified to do, sort of, just to pay bills and But at night I was trying to go out and meet people, and after about a year of that, working at this little law office, it was like a personal injury, really the armpit of the legal profession, trying to make money off of people's accidents and injuries.
Running local commercials at 3 a.m.
Yeah, it wasn't quite that bad, but it was the same business.
Okay.
Small little office, 2 lawyers. Essentially, trying to get people who got into accidents to get as much medical treatment as possible in order to bill an insurance company. I mean, it was just a shady.
So the whole angle is at the insurance company.
It's all about suing insurance companies. That's the job. It's actually not even suing, settling with insurance companies. So you get a person who's in an accident. They'd call, be like, I was in a car accident. Yesterday, okay, did you go to the ER? No, you need to go. Then you need to get referred to a specialist. Then you need to start taking these neuro treatments, and then you got to go to chiropractic. Garner as much of an illusion of deep, serious injury as possible.
Yeah.
So that we can go at Allstate or Geico or whatever and be like, hey, this person was really hurt, and to make them go away, we're gonna, So that was the business. They very rarely.
The facades in both camps. You got,
totally
the big LA pop gig that's kind of a dog and pony show, and then you got the lawyer gig that's kind of a dog and pony show.
Yeah, none of it felt like me, and I think that was the issue. And I was really feeling that, starting to get a little depressed about the whole scenario, and also just I think I just split up with my girlfriend. I mean, it was just a lot of change and transition and feeling kind of dark and not that I wasn't doing the thing I came here to do. And
sure.
It was in that context that I learned of this opportunity at bass player. I think kind of coincidentally, I read an ad in Craigslist. I think I was searching bass and it came up or something, Oh, wow. And then I had a friend who worked at another publication that this parent company at the time owned, and she heard about it through the internal grapevine, and she emailed me. She's like, check this out. And I remember reading the job description, it was for a technical editor position, and being like, okay, well, I have to get this job. Like, this is the coolest job I've ever heard of, because the job description was.
Oh yeah, what was the job?
Well,
it
was like,
to read that title. I mean, that means like I would be correcting grammar.
Right.
Like
no,
someone else gets to write the cool article, and now I just
Right.
need to make sure that the commas are in the right place.
I mean, regardless, even if that had been the case, just to be a Bass Player magazine, which I think younger people may not realize was everything as far as the bass, culture of bass.
No, that was the new one's coming out. Who's on the cover? It was
totally.
That was the talking point of all of it. Yeah.
Yep, that's where I learned about everything, really, and so it was an informative part of my life, and I was at the time subscribed, and it was
sure, me too.
Avid reader. But the job description was about, so technical editor was like the gear guy, the gear coverage, which obviously is an important part of the magazine, and it was like must love the bass guitar and be knowledgeable about the history of the instrument and be willing to travel to talk to famous bass players. I mean, it was like, oh my God, like this is
that's a dream job that you just stumbled on Craigslist
randomly on Craigslist. So
sure.
It seemed to be at the time like this is the answer. And again, I was feeling really kind of angsty and bummed, and so I see this opportunity. I'm like, what a fortuitous moment to learn of this. So I was like, I invested so much in what it would mean to get that job, and I remember even thinking like, if I don't get that job, like I'm going to reconsider living here, and maybe I'll go back to LA or move to New York. I was like all these thoughts I had that this hinged on that. And I remember I wrote a one-off. So I sent my resume or whatever and had some conversations. And then as there was a little sample, I wrote a review this is like the August 2002 issue, I think, which means this would have been like summer of 2002. I wrote this article. It was a product review of a bass, a Godin, I remember. You never forget your first review. And then I went in and interviewed and met all these people whose names I knew from reading the magazine for so long. And at the time, this was still like very much a successful concern, the magazine's publishing, print in general. So the offices were like crazy impressive, and they had this sound room. There was like a soundproof room in the office, which had like, it was filled with their reference amps and basses, and it just seemed like insane place to work.
And now to understand your mindset walking into this room, like who's on your bass Mount Rushmore at the time?
Oh wow!
Like who you going into that if like you see this person, or if you have to interview this person, you're gonna just completely lose it because this is the cat you've been following since. He's meant so much to you in your whole development.
Sure. Probably at the time it was Jocko, Anthony Jackson.
Sure.
Marcus.
Okay.
Haslip. Which is interesting. I was very much.
I like that. I like that. I'd like to get Haslip on an episode 1. Two. Like I don't feel like he's a name, but I don't think he gets the goods.
Yeah, I agree. And he
should. He's kind of like he's on this kind of like off to the side thing.
Right. Right. I mean, I think I was very much a guy coming out of like an LA music school,
Sure.
and like learning all this fusion for the first time and learning about who like, Dave Carpenter and like these LA fusion heavies, Gary Willis.
Yeah. What was LA like back in I didn't mean to in the course of the timeline. What was LA like when you were going to Llama, and did
it was sick.
There was
old
awesome. Catalina's was still around.
Yep.
Catalina's is now moved.
Catalina's,
Potato, Lava Lee.
Lava Lee was huge.
Spazio was probably there, but that's always been the acoustic hang until it closed down.
Yeah, I remember it was Lava Lee and the Potato were like the two kind of places that would usually come up as like, it's a Tuesday night and it's Mike Landau, this Jimmy Johnson,
Right.
being
Jimmy
able
Earl, Rick Farabachi,
Jimmy Earl,
Carlitos,
Rick,
like all those
exactly,
dudes.
exactly. So that, Jerry Watts was
Sure.
playing Hussein, Jifrey.
Yeah.
And so it was dope. It was like, you could go out on a random weeknight and see like world-class musicianship, on the rig. And those were the, the guys that were teaching. I mean, Mike Shapiro was there at the time, Gambale. So yeah, it was sick. It was why you want to be in a place like LA, because you can just go out and see this kind of thing on the regular. There was no, it was a different scene than the.
Weird. Yeah, it's weird now, and like after a while of living here, you take it for granted. Like, it's okay. It's Abe at the potato, but whatever. I'll catch it next time.
Oh yeah, Abe, definitely Abe. Yeah.
Yeah, like you get so conditioned to it here, and it's kind of sad. That,
right.
You
take it for granted.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I wish I'd done more of it then, because I didn't really appreciate even then how lucky I was. And it was definitely more of that typical, I mean, now when I think of LA, I don't think of that kind of, this is still very much like a fusion, kind of traditional sort of 90s fusion, Jeff Lorber Jackets sound than it is like now. I think of like the Blue Whale and like all the hip shit.
That's more of an artsy
acoustic. It's more like what you I would associate at the time with like New York, which I think was true at the time. New York is where that was happening. And a lot of those guys just moved out here and brought that vibe with them.
They brought a lot of that, and I think because of the internet, and like now, like someone who's playing at Smalls can broadcast the whole gig via their phone.
Right.
Watch it, and same can happen at the Whale or any other little kind of spaces that are popping up. The Blue Whale's probably that's the one that always comes to mind first. But there's other little things always popping up, like art galleries and stuff.
Galleries. Yeah, totally.
That are doing really art-forward music.
Totally. Yeah, it was much more the slick, LA fusion vibe at the time, and guys who were doing pop sessions by day and shredding by night.
Mount Rushmore, we were like, who would be the guys? So like that's you got Jocko, Anthony Jackson, Marcus Haslip, and very heavily LA electric jazz.
LA electric jazz, and then I mean there was acoustic players, Dave Holland, Steve Swallow.
Okay,
was a big one. He's not an acoustic player, but
he's in that scene as an electric player.
Yeah, straight ahead scene. I mean, that was probably a lot of it. There was a guy when I was at Lama named Ed Lucy, who was a real Steve Swallow acolyte.
Okay,
I probably would not have been that aware of him had that not been the case, but I came to really love him. And
similar technique, like with the pick.
With the pick, and I actually had that bass.
Wow.
Yeah, he had a Parker, then he had a Citron, just like Steve. Real like heavy Steve cat.
What was his personal connection? Did he study with Steve or no Steve? Or
I think he knew him. I think he did study with him in Boston. I think back in maybe even the 70s when Steve was at Berkeley. I think there was some overlap there. And also just a huge fan. So those would have been the people. It was very like just music school kid. Like
soaking
it all up. And I know those are the cats, and it was that area where you couldn't really like just access music on a whim. So you had to like go. So I hadn't probably heard as much of, Anthony Jackson or someone like that as I could have, because I just would have to go buy all those CDs to hear it, and I couldn't do that very well. So, But yeah, so I went to the office and interviewed with a variety of the staff at the time, and somehow, by some miracle, I got the job, and it seemed miraculous because I had zero editorial, sort of journalistic experience. I was obviously a bass player and passionate about that part. That I could check that box, but I knew nothing about making a magazine, and was also, I think, probably 15 years younger, at least, than the next oldest person on the staff. So I felt like a kid, and I was. And
now, since is this a thing where you would report to the office every day, or you just kind of like have the month to figure out what you want to write about, and then email
was
or
very
mail
much
in your final product, or was it
no,
an
it was very
office
much
gig?
like a real job, Monday through Friday, show up,
That's
do 9
kind
to
of cool.
5.
I mean,
Yeah, it was at the time.
it seems like a
that
fun
evolved.
energy to be a part of, just like a bunch of bass players, a bunch of, sarcastic musician humor.
Oh my God, it was it's so cool. I
Yeah.
mean, the people there. I mean, there was this intersection in the staff of like real wit and then passion about music and passion about bass, but each one coming from their own sort of
Right.
angle at it, and then a real commitment, really, really embodied in the form of I think there's a guy named Carl Coriat who is a longtime bass player affiliated person. He was on the editorial staff for a very long time and continued to do stuff when he left. And Carl is one of the most brilliant people I've ever known. Maybe he's like a multiple-time Jeopardy winner, which he wouldn't let you forget, and just a fascinating human. Yeah, Carl. He put his down payment on his house because of his Jeopardy. He won. I think he won 2 in a row. But he was just like this. He's a character, man. It's hard to explain him. I mean, he's a real autodidactic genius who wrote a book about like his theories of the origins of the universe that required learning calculus on his own, and also has written multiple books about songwriting and composition. Guerrilla home recording is one of them, I recall.
Have enjoyed this episode and would like to know more about upcoming guests and other Bass Shed happenings, you can text the word SHED, S-H-E-D, to 66866. I try to make it easy. I try to make it easy as possible to stay connected. And let's be honest, we're all sending texts throughout the day, so just shoot me one. Shoot me one that says SHED, S-H-E-D, to 66866. And we'll get you plugged into the newsletter. You can also hear previous versions of the podcast at Apple Podcast, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Stitcher. Please take a second to rate the show. And if you'd like, you can donate to keep this thing happening. There is a link for that at thebassshed.com/podcast. All right, that was Jonathan Herrera, part 1. And I hope everybody sticks around for part 2 of the conversation. There was a natural break in the conversation. We just kind of took 5 about, at the point where these 2 episodes are split. And so a lot of times on the when there's 2 parts to an episode, I'll do a little bit of back roll, previously on the Bass Shed podcast kind of vibe. That I don't do that on this one. So we're just going to kind of pick up where Jonathan and I pick up. It's just to continue the stream of consciousness that we were both in, and you're a part of it as we were a part of it. I don't know. Maybe that's cool. Maybe I'm really suck at producing a podcast. I don't know. Maybe both. So there's all that. Stick around for part 2, and I'm Ryan. Catch you on the next one.